And population level work in RBA does tie back to theory of change. And as a reminder, theory of change is if we do X, then Y happens. If Y happens, Z happens. If Z happens, double A happens, and so on and so forth. And what this starts to highlight are short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes for the work that you do. And the farther out you get into that long term, it may point you in the direction of your population result that you're looking for. So the further you get out, the closer you'll be sort of seeing your connection to the big community or population level result you aspire to. Next slide. And that reminds me of a story way back when I was introducing RBA at my United Way to one of our funded partners, Jim Moulton at Addison County Trust. He sort of had this ha-ha as we were trying to drill down to the population result. He goes, oh, I get it. We saved the world one bus ride at a time, right? And he did do a little refining after that to sort of narrow it down. But the reality was he was talking about sort of economic well-being and environmental well-being and all those big ticket items that he hadn't necessarily connected to getting a passenger on one of his public transportation buses. Next slide. So that theory of change in the RBA, it will point you, if you're stuck thinking about what is this population level result, what is it that I'm hoping for the community I've defined, you can think about your theory of change. You can also remember that accountability line back in that overview, which says this is where we connect the dots between what we do and a big community need or gap. And if it's not working from that approach, then you can also just ask why until you get there. Next slide. Why do we do this? And that goes to either Six Sigma or the 5, I forget the model, but it's sort of asking why 5 times. So why? We offer training. Why do we offer training? We offer training so farmers learn best practices. Why do we do that? So they implement the best practices. Why do we want that? So that they stop doing X or they start doing Y. Why do we do that? And that's so they stop contributing to X or start improving Y. So at that point, when you've gotten that far out to the answering 6 or 5 layers of why, you might get to that community result you're aiming for. All right. I'll pause for a minute. Any questions or comments? Okay, with sort of it could be very quick, and I would, you might play with it just yourself, just so you have a good understanding of what you think the whys are. But I think it's a good conversation to have with other folks, especially if you're bringing in sort of diverse layers of the organization. Because one, anytime we ask a question, we have to be willing to listen to other people's views. But it's also a way of educating folks. So if you bring board members or new staff members or existing staff members or other program people, stakeholders, you might get some interesting answers, right?
Yeah.
Why they're there and what the difference is they think it's making.
Yeah.
It can be really
thanks for doing this.
It doesn't have to be long.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this for me. It's like you've already started me all the way up. You've done my whys. Good.
I love the question why. And sometimes there's some surprises in the room, which is fun, especially as people connect the dots on that theory of change. Right. So in a more perfect world, and this is sort of the difference between a logic model and RBA. RBA really wants you to start at this population level. A lot of folks don't, because we've inherited programs and we're really interested in knowing if the work we're doing is good. But in a perfect world, you start with the result, and then you design the strategies to get there. Usually we've inherited strategies and we're either justifying the work and designing to a result, moving towards that result. This is sort of turning it upside down. And it's a very interesting thing to put your programs on, turn them upside down, put them on their head to say, let's start again. And is this the program we would actually design now, knowing that this is the population result we're going for? And that would help inform any strategic changes you might make or tweaks to the program that you're doing. Next slide. versus a logic model. I'll just say, so a logic model, which because we lead left to right, starts with the things that we have. What resources do we have? What activities can we or are we doing? What happens as a result of those activities to the clients we serve? What's produced or what outcomes are there? And that leads the other way. So we start with what we have. RBA flips it on its head and says, the conversation needs to be, what do we want to achieve? Then how do we achieve it? So the 7-question process should look familiar. It's very aligned with the program performance questions. So the first question, and there is a hand, that one of that handouts that you have is a very detailed sheet on this that that you can pull and take a look at. But the first one is again the result. So what is it we want? And this is where you get to decide the scope of your sandbox or the sea that you're swimming in. You get to define geographically and population-wise what it is that you are contributing to. So in this case, these are those Russian nesting dolls. It can be the state of Vermont. It could be one county. It could be one town. It could be one river. It could be the entire world. That you're drawing your geographic boundaries around it. The other boundaries that can be identified are specific client demographics. So it could be women farmers. It could be just freshwater thing. I mean, the description of who you serve and the sandbox, again, is entirely up to you, but you're going to want to be clear about it, because if you're not clear about it, then that's sort of where mission creep starts to creep in, or has the potential to. So again, what's your geography and what's your criteria for the folks that you want to serve? And then you ask, what do we want? So we want clean water, we want clean air, we want healthy babies, we want well-educated population in Vermont, is how you would frame that up. The second question, and again, these processes are conversational. So you can of course answer them all by yourself, and you'll have your very own beautiful ideas without any checks and balances. Ideally, this is a conversation with multiple people, multiple stakeholders, people with interesting viewpoints other than your own. So then the next question is, how would we experience this? What would they look like, feel like, taste, smell like, if we could live in that result? Probably, for some of us, that would mean we wouldn't ever have to worry about swimming in Lake Champlain or taking our dogs down there, right? It would mean we could go swimming in the rivers and not have to worry that our kids are going to get sick. Whatever that looks like and feels like is a pointer to how you might measure those conditions. So the next part is an indicator. These are measures. Now, measures for population level generally come from some outside source. You guys are an interesting mix because many of you are the collector of large data points. So in some cases, you are collecting that both your programmatic results and the big results for the whole community. So it's just a question of which one is it for you. Then once you have those indicators, you start pulling some of the data and you create the baseline and the story behind the story. And it's really important here, again, not to just rely on data, because data can be misleading or adjusted to tell your story. So, and you can miss some things by looking under the hood. So you get your trend, your baseline, your trend line, you take a look at that trend line and say, if we don't do anything, are we satisfied with this space that we're in, or do we need to do something different? And you also ask questions about how are we doing over time. You ask who's not, or what areas aren't making the cut. Where are we failing, and what do we propose to do about it? The next question is, again, who are the partners that have a role to play? These should look familiar to you because we ask this at the programmatic level too. And then you brainstorm what works to get the results we want. This is that brainstorming part. You do it for your strategies as well, but this creates new strategies or adjustments to strategies. It could be your work or someone else's work in the community. It could be about how you intersect with each other and do better together. And then finally, once you have that brainstorm, you can't possibly do all of those ideas. So then you have a process by which you narrow it down to what can you actually achieve right now. And there's all sorts of mechanisms for making that happen. And I think I've mentioned the three questions that I really like right now is, can we do it now without much additional resources or much additional work? Can we sustain that over time, and will it have a high impact? Are the questions that I've been asking when trying to implement new strategies. So I'll stop and say, what questions or comments have you on this list of questions?